thyself is to love thyself, is to examine, observe, and respect thyself. It's an ongoing process, never to be explained in a brief synopsis. It's a preoccupation with reflection and revelation that can only be achieved through discipline and determination. Hello, and thank you for watching the Encouraging Word Show. I am your host, Jamila Freelain, and today's show is especially fun. As you know, I'm big on helping students and parents with college and career preparation. And one of the things that I think is probably key and most important is providing awareness and exposure to many different career areas. So I'm excited to have my next guest, and I'll tell you a bit about him in just a second. For those of you that may be new to the show, just real quickly, what we do at this show is to really try to inspire and again create awareness and exposure to areas you may not have thought about or things you may not have considered as it relates to college and career preparation. And the show is based on a book that I wrote called Free Money for College, which provides strategies, resources, and tips. It's a little bit autobiographical too. You can learn about some of my triumphs and some of my pitfalls as it related to me going to college and kind of learning that path on my own. Now, today's guest is a very special guest. He is actually the program chair for welding at Central Piedmont Community College, and my guest is Steve Gore. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me.
No problem. My pleasure. So Steve is here to talk about welding, of course. As I mentioned, he's the program chair for the welding department. And I really wanted to highlight welding because, again, it's one of those areas for a lot of people that's lesser known, but we take it for granted and we use things that are welded every single day. Whether it was the bridges that we go across that are welded together and have the iron infrastructure, or would that be steel? I guess that would be steel probably.
It would be mostly steel.
Yeah. And then if you think of something like the camera, for example, that we're using to share with you guys today, things in the camera would probably be soldered. Yes. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yes.
Soldered. Okay.
Yes.
So things like that we take for granted. Now, to that end, when you think about it, when it comes to a lot of the technical areas, welding in particular, there's what we call a skills gap. And with that skills gap, a lot of that can be attributed to a lot of times parents don't maybe necessarily know about the opportunities in these fields. Instructors like teachers, school administrators oftentimes don't know about these areas.
Counselors as well.
Counselors as well. So all of that goes into the mix, and for that reason, because there's a lot of these technical classes that maybe once existed in the high schools and the middle schools, but they've taken out a lot of those what they would consider vocational related classes, so there's even less of an awareness, not to mention that many of the people in the field may be retiring, that sort of thing. Very so there's true. This huge gap both in terms of people being skilled in that area as well as the interest gap. There's an interest gap though because there's not an awareness about it.
Very true.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, certainly. Well, with welding, it's one of those skill sets where you need both your brain and your hands. And you hear folks say, well, I want to get into one of the hands-on professions. Well, welding's not it then, because you are going to use your brain. And beyond that, you want to be paid from the shoulders up anyway. And we have, right now we have about 30 graduates that already possess bachelor degrees in our program, currently pursuing an Associate of Applied Science degree in welding technology because they can't find decent paying jobs in the areas that they graduated from.
Wow. And just because that is a phenomenon that most people aren't aware of, again, a lot of people that are going back into these technical areas, and I say back, is because, again, they have a bachelor's degree already, but maybe that particular area isn't in demand, so then they come and look at something like these technical areas, which they maybe could have considered in the first place.
Very true.
And come out with a lot less debt and been more employable.
Absolutely.
Have you noticed a trend for those that have the bachelor's degrees? Are they coming from certain areas? Or
basically from just about everywhere.
So it's a good cross-section.
Yes. One of our students who graduates on Thursday has a business degree, and another has a degree in physics. We've had engineering degree graduates.
Yeah,
although they can find employment, it's just not decent paying jobs.
Right.
We've had students with degrees in psychology and liberal arts and other areas as well.
Okay, so again, it's a good cross-section of people that are going into the area of welding, and a lot of times, again, it's because maybe they didn't know about that particular area starting off.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, there's also an article that I'll share with you guys on the slide at the end of the show today. I think it's phenomenal. There's an article about 7 different really interesting things about welders that most people wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is talking about the career paths within welding. Can you address some of those?
Absolutely. It's vast, the amount of career paths that branches out from welding. You can go in heavy construction, heavy maintenance, aerospace, maritime applications, military, medical science, biomedical processing of equipment,
Wow.
food and distilleries. That's very popular now with all the
How would you do some? What would you do with
microbreweries.
welding and microbreweries? So
Yes, all the
designing the I don't even know what you call it, the vats.
and all
Okay.
the high pressure areas where you have stuff being processed, but also the surgical grade stainless steel
Okay.
that all your product would pass through, and you want a certain degree of purity, to name a few.
Now, here's one thing that I really, honestly, I'll be totally transparent. I did not realize that underwater welding was an actual thing. And
Yes.
I remember on a tour, just having the privilege of listening to you talk about your background, and you mentioned underwater welding, and I was waiting for him to crack a smile, because I was like, how do you weld and it's wet? And how
Yes.
does that work? And what exactly is that? What industry would that be used in?
You use underwater welding primarily in the energy sector, either petroleum or there are other areas where you have underwater applications to
Okay.
include nuclear power generation,
Wow.
where you have areas that need to be welded, all the while being underwater, because water will provide a much better shield against the radiation than air would. And also military applications, be it naval architecture or whatnot, for underwater welding.
Wow.
And I did it for a number of years when I
Yeah.
worked for the Electric Power Research Institute as a welding researcher. They offered me a chance to go to school. I took it.
Okay. Wow. Now, then, okay, you mentioned some of the industries that you could work in as an underwater welder. What did that consist of in terms of your training?
Well, I was already trained as a welder. I'm a CPCC alumni myself.
Okay.
Took advantage of the GI Bill when I left the Army, 1978. Got the Vietnam era GI Bill.
Okay.
And beyond that, a lot of job opportunities opened up to me just because I had that college education.
Okay, of
So-
course. And for the underwater welding, then, I mean, did you have to learn the
Yes, I-
scuba dive or something? Or?
When I got the job at EPRI, or the Electric Power Research Institute, the former chair, Mr. Wallace, Robert Wallace, he's deceased now, unfortunately, he recommended me for the job back in 1985. And of course, they hired me, and then from that point, they offered me one school after another, and I never, ever turned down any industry training whatsoever.
Okay, that's
Including the opportunity to become an underwater welder. I had to go to scuba diving school and all that.
Wow. And what would the pay be like for something like that?
Well, I did it as a researcher, so I didn't get the rate of pay that some folks would get, but I hear upwards now of $200 an hour. But of course, that only pertains to when you're actually doing underwater welding, or you're coming back up and going into a hyperbaric chamber to minimize the effects of decompression, or to enhance decompression, I should say.
And that's interesting, like you mentioned, for maybe that person that comes out with a bachelor's degree in physics and then couples that knowledge with, let's say, if it was something like underwater welding, I would imagine a person like that could literally write their own ticket.
Yes.
So again, and it's all about not just thinking of going to school, but thinking how to be strategic and intentional with it, and looking at fields even like this, like welding, that are in demand. I think with one of the statistics that I saw, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, between 2016 and 2026, there's an anticipated 6% growth rate for the industry overall, and then there's a 26% demand for the field overall. When you think of welding, what do you think are probably the key things or the things that are most interesting about your particular industry?
Well, what I really love about welding is the fact, again, that you're using your brain really more than you're using your hands.
Okay.
And,
how so?
well, because you're looking at complicated drawings, you're reading, interpreting welding procedure specifications, and you're adhering to code, be it aviation FAA code, military or naval specs, American Welding Society, American Petroleum Institute, or pressure routine applications with the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. So there's a lot going on, and
Yeah, definitely.
industry realizes that, and there's really great paying jobs out there. In fact, you mentioned underwater welding. One of my graduates starts at the dive school in Charleston in a couple of weeks.
Oh, okay. Wow. So he's actually pursuing that area.
Yes.
Were you the inspiration for that, or?
I think a little bit, but I can't take the credit.
Full
But,
credit. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about welding, because again, without most people realizing it, this is actually literally one of the fastest growing professions right now
Yes,
in
it
the
is.
country. With Central Piedmont in your program, you can earn a degree, you can earn a certificate, or you can go and pursue
1 year.
professional certifications. Tell me the distinctions between those so that we're all clear on that.
Okay, thank you. The certificate of completion is a group of college level classes that you would complete in any area, be it machining, electrical, engineering, or welding, or whatnot. And it's just a group of classes.
Okay.
It's
That are
different.
specifically
Yes.
in welding, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And all programs have certificates of completion. But what would differentiate that with a welding certification is you would actually go through and test according to industry standards that have been tried and proven many times over.
Okay.
And you would actually pick up, and earn welding certifications.
Gotcha. The way I think of it is when you think of something like real estate, for example, you can major in real estate, or you can major in something like finance if you're at a 2-year or 4-year school, and certainly you can earn a degree in it.
Yes.
But in order to be licensed as a realtor or a real estate broker, they still have to go before the real estate board. So with welding, is that true too?
Absolutely.
Okay. What is the certification board for that does the professional designations or certifications for welding?
Okay, with Central Piedmont, we are also one of only 2 accredited test facilities in North Carolina. Forsyth Community College is the other.
Oh, okay, I'm familiar with that school.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
and we are accredited through the American Welding Society to test and certify welders.
Okay, yes, AWS.
Yes, in fact, with my capstone class last week, we tested all my students as part of their exit final exam.
How'd they do?
They did very well. We had a passing rate of a little over 84%.
Okay.
So
Splendid.
very good. And the ones who obviously passed now possess a structural welding certification.
Okay, and is that like a lot of the licensing exams,
Yes.
like 4 hours long?
Yes,
or-
and this,
Yeah.
in fact, this took about 8 to 9 hours.
Whew, that's a whole day of testing.
Yes, and,
Wow.
it involves them reading a welding procedure and complying to that standard and having hold points along the way, fit up, root inspection of the weld, interpass temperature checks along the way, and then the final exam.
Okay.
If they pass the final exam, where they can, again, critiquing to industry standards, they'll be allowed to take it down once it cools and cut it apart, and we'll do a destructive bend test on it. We're checking the structural integrity of the weld, both against the face and against the root of the weld. And it's for the general safety of the public. We just do not want to release folks out there that can't weld.
Right, which makes sense. I
You're
mean,
absolutely endangering the public then.
right. I did a highlight of NDE a few weeks ago, and we talked about the importance of things being structurally sound, and of course you want somebody to be able to test it on the back end, but
Yes.
even beforehand you'd want to make sure it was welded right the first
Absolutely,
time.
and,
Yeah.
and non-destructive examination, or NDE, is our sister program. And a lot of times before, in critical areas like in aviation or nuclear power or whatnot, you're going to have receipt inspections done on critical components before you even weld on them. Because you want to make sure that those components do not have subsurface defects.
So you guys would do the testing on that?
Well, NDE would do the testing on that, but then
Okay.
then of course we would follow up with installing,
Right.
high
Okay.
quality welds.
And putting it in place. Okay, well, great.
I'm also a certified welding inspector.
Okay, so you've got coverage on both ends. You know how to weld and you know how to inspect. So
Yes.
puts you in a lot of demand, I'm sure. Now, before we wrap up and go to the commercial break, one of the things that I wanted to mention was the number of graduates. I think you were telling me in between in the break that this is the largest number of graduates your program has ever seen in the
Yes.
history of the program.
Yes.
So how many graduates do you have for the associate's degree?
Right now, we're looking at 26 degree graduates who will walk in our graduation procession on
Impressive.
this Thursday.
Okay.
The degree itself was created in 1998, and that the first year they had one graduate, and it's been slowly climbing
Increasing
ever since.
then. Wow. Well, what a successful program. Glad to hear it.
Thank
We'll
you.
have more about that coming back from the break. Stay tuned. And we're back. So thank you for staying tuned. Now, if you're just joining me for this moment, just to kind of debrief you and catch you up, we are talking today about the field of welding. The industry of welding is really exciting. There's a lot of opportunities in it that people just don't know about. Not only right now, ladies and gentlemen, nationally is there what we call a skills gap because people are not going into skilled trades and skilled areas in the way in which they were, say, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But in addition to that, there's what we call an interest gap. And the interest gap is due to the fact that a lot of people just are not knowledgeable about what technical areas there are that are available. A lot of students don't necessarily succeed or are not necessarily poised or positioned best for a 4-year school. It doesn't make them a bad student, doesn't make the student who doesn't choose a 4-year school a poor decision maker or someone who is less than. But when you know about opportunities like this, especially when you realize that some of these opportunities that are technical can pay as much as you would earn if you were something like a doctor or a medical professional, that sort of thing. You can make 6 and 7 figures in some of these areas. It's pretty enlightening when you really think about it, especially if you're a business owner in some of these more technical areas. Now, today's show is again dedicated to technical careers, and the specific area we're highlighting today is welding. If you've missed any of the shows before, real quick, it's based on the book Free Money for College. Take a look at the book, check it out, and definitely feel free to inbox me if you'd like more information about that. Now I want to jump right in. One thing that I want to ask or touch base on is to find out, we talked about professional certifications in the first segment, and we talked about the distinction between certificates, so a group of classes that's directed at one aspect of maybe welding or whatever that program is, versus the professional designation, which would come from a higher authority in that industry,
yes.
An accreditation board or what have you. For someone who gets a certificate or is thinking, I don't know if I can complete a degree, I've got a family, I just need to do maybe a short stint, get my foot in the door. What kinds of certificates, what career tracks are there for that, and what certificates are available?
I'm glad you brought that up. We have a couple of 32-week certificates that are going to start off this August. And if anybody's interested, you can find me online, steve.gore@cpcc.edu. And I'd be happy to assist getting folks lined up with that. And I believe we do have some scholarship dollars, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely, for these technical areas. That's actually a lesser known fact as well, because these areas are so in demand. And let me tell you, industry partners or companies that are hiring for these areas are really chomping at the bit because there is such a deficit. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are most talented and skilled in these areas, if you realize the fact that there's such a demand and that industry is chomping at the bit, a lot of these companies are then pouring money into paying for the training. So not only does that mean already when you're looking at something like a community college or maybe a vocational program, oftentimes you might be able to cut your costs. But then on top of that, if you have industry that is really, really, really just hell-bent on making sure that they've got a pipeline of graduates to choose from, that means they'll put money into the programs and pay you to go to school. It doesn't get any better than that.
Absolutely. In fact, to your point, most of our graduates already have jobs. Just right out of the
the gate. Right. I think you mentioned, now graduation is Thursday,
yes.
And you've already got some students that are, or some graduates,
yes.
recent graduates that are employed and starting work this week.
Some of them started work today.
Oh, wow, that's funny.
And some started last week on a part-time basis, and now they're going to be full-time.
Awesome. Okay. Well, now, with that being said, so those 32-week tracks you said are available.
We also have 16-week certificates of completion, which can be done in a regular college semester, fall or spring. And we also have a 1-year diploma, and of course, our standard 2-year Associate Applied Science degree track, plus 3 new degree tracks are going to kick off in the fall. So
can you give us an example of what one of those certificates would be? Like, what would I learn with you mentioned a 16-week certificate, for example.
One of them would be...
What would that be? What would I learn?
One of them would be the entry-level certificate in welding technology. And with that, you would take cutting processes, which is 2 credit hours. You learn all about plasma arc cutting, oxy-fuel cutting, carbon arc gouging, various mechanical means of drilling and sawing as well on metals. You would take the first level of gas metal arc welding, or MIG welding as it's also called. The first level of stick welding, or shielded metal arc welding as it's called. The first level of gas tungsten arc welding, or TIG welding as it's called. And the final class would be the symbols and specifications, which is our print reading class, which is also that also touches on code and welding procedure specifications. Okay, so TIG and MIG, those are popular terms that I hear all the time, and I just heard you use those. Yes. So break it down for those of us that aren't in the industry. Okay, MIG welding, that's an old acronym which means metallic inert gas. And of course, the modern acronym, gas metal arc welding, because modern MIG welding or gas metal arc welding uses both inert and reactive gases. It is, your electrode is of course a spool of wire, and it's one of the easier forms of welding to learn. And TIG welding, or gas tungsten arc welding, is where you're holding your filler wire independent of the torch. Is that the one where they use the copper wire? Well, it's copper coated, and the wire and the MIG is also copper coated, and that's to prevent corrosion or on the outside of the filler material for oxidation, and it's also for MIG welding. It's also a better electrical conductor because the spool of wire is your electrode. With TIG welding, you're using a non-consumable tungsten electrode, and you generate your heat that way with the addition of reactive and inert gases, depending on your gas mixture ratio and all that. Not to be too technical, but there is a lot to know there, but it is enjoyable, and it's definitely worth pursuing. Okay. Now, what we have, I guess, is I would call the essentials. Yes. Or maybe some of the essentials of a welding starter kit. Yes. So what have we here? This is a auto darkening welding head. This is basically 21st century technology. Okay. And you can set the shade and the reaction time in there. Okay. And you can also look at the weld. You know, when the weld starts, your hood will instantly darken to the specified kind of like those smart lenses. Yes. That's smart technology in there. Okay. And there's also, as you'll notice, in some of the hoods, including this one, there's a little solar panel down there. Yeah. Okay, so that kind of reads the level of light. Yes. Okay. And it helps generate power to keep the hood working properly. Gotcha. Okay. And so these are sustainable hoods as well. Absolutely, yes. Okay. And you can also use these not only for grinding, but also for cutting and for welding various materials, various processes. Okay. What do we have here? These are some TIG welding gloves, and you have thicker ones for MIG and stick welding, but the reason you would prefer the thinner gloves is you have more dexterity for your hands. About how hot do these temperatures get? Well, the typical arc temperature for stick, for MIG, for TIG is around 11 to 12,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Are you kidding me? Pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah. And it seems like these would be a lot thicker. So is
Well,
this like fire retardant? Like,
It is not, but the
Oh.
idea, and you'll learn this from experience, is not to touch those hot materials.
yeah. 11,000 degrees.
Yes, yes. That's only during the welding operation itself.
Right.
Now, we mentioned cutting processes for plasma arc cutting.
Mm-hmm.
The operating temperatures around 35,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But you think how hot that
I
is?
thought 11,000 was hot. You said
Yes.
35,000.
35,000. But the
Wow.
advantage to that is you're cutting material super fast, so you don't have the heat input.
Okay.
It's superheated and then it cools super quickly.
Okay. Because
As
you're
opposed
going
to,
like this.
lower heat and you're cutting much slower and you're saturating the part with heat.
Okay. So when you're cutting a lot, you're not heating up the whole sheet
you're
of
not.
metal or what have you because it's that concentrated area.
Correct.
Okay. Tell me about the steel brush here.
And that's basically it's a wire brush which is used to remove soot from finished welds and light surface oxidation before you weld.
Okay. And last but not least, what's this guy?
These are called welpers or welder's pliers,
Mm-hmm.
and they have multi uses, cleaning out the nozzle
Mm-hmm.
on MIG guns or flux core guns, cutting the wire, removing the contact tip, or removing the nozzle.
Okay.
That way you can touch it with your pliers without ruining your gloves or burning your hands.
Okay, so you can cut with this when it's
Yes.
still when the metal is still hot.
Yes,
Okay, and it won't melt this.
Right.
Now, what are these made out of then?
that's a tool grade carbon steel.
Okay,
It's high carbon.
gotcha.
And of course with welding you'll learn a lot about chemistry and metallurgy as well.
I think probably much more so than most people realize.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I was thinking of when you mentioned the guy with the physics. Just the thought of all of the things that you're learning about metallurgy and metals and just heat processes and
Mhm.
transformations, and then you think about his background in physics as well. My gosh, what possibilities that
Absolutely.
provides. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So now, real quick, what I want to do is to take the word of the day. Now, what word or maybe even phrase would you think of to describe yourself? What is a word or a phrase that encourages you?
Well, for me personally, I feel blessed.
Mhm.
That would be my word,
Okay.
blessed, because of through hard work and dedication and perseverance, I'm blessed to be where I'm at.
Mhm.
But without a quality education that I've received myself at Central Piedmont Community College, I wouldn't be here right now.
Okay. And blessed, I think, is a really great word. I would definitely agree with blessed. I feel blessed every day, really, truly I do. And if I had to think of one word for myself, fitting today anyway, I think that knowledge is probably my word, because I think when you have knowledge of like these opportunities or different things that are available to you, you can make a much more educated, much more focused, much more intentional decision about what path to take and what direction to go in. And I think that's key, because I find that so many people are just kind of searching and approaching college and careers just in a haphazard manner, and they end up doing so to their detriment. I
Yes.
feel like debt is really the new slavery.
I completely agree. And to your point about knowledge, and someone once said knowledge is power. It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And knowledge is also liberating.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark Twain once said, "It's true, money can't buy happiness," but you know what? Money makes misery a little bit more comfortable. So.
I would agree. Or as one comedian said, it may not buy happiness, but it'll do a good impression.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, one last thing I want to ask you. What would be the advantage between having a degree versus maybe having a certificate in welding?
Well, for those who aren't sure, I would recommend starting with a certificate, and try us out. And if you don't like us, find something you do like. But I would almost guarantee, won't guarantee, because there is no guarantees really in life.
Right.
But I would almost guarantee that you'll stay for the long haul and complete your degree. And to that point, we also have articulation agreements set up with several local universities and colleges where you can pursue a bachelor's degree after you finish with us.
And what would be the advantage of having a degree, though, in welding?
Well, let's say you transferred to East Carolina University. They have a great online program. You could complete your Associate of Applied Science degree with us. You could transfer there into their industrial Bachelor of Science program. You can get a bachelor's degree in industrial supervision. Between having the welding degree and that, you're gonna be on
You'll
top.
always be in demand.
Absolutely.
Okay, good to know. So we thank you so much for watching today. Hopefully you got a little more insight, and please share the show with some of your friends and family that you think maybe could benefit. Not just for someone that's coming out of high school, but even if you know of an adult who's maybe looking at doing a career change and wants to do something that is much more hands-on, but also has that thinking, always has their thinking cap on. This could really yield a lot of opportunities. We want to thank you for watching. Thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you.
And don't forget to tune in every Thursday.